So Caolan, good to have you join us on this side of the camera. So when Peter and I met you about 2 years ago, you had been working with some far-right figures. One of those was Stephen Yaxley Lennon, who's best known to people as Tommy Robinson, a far-right activist who is the co-founder of the English Defence League. So what exactly were you doing in that world?
In 2016, the Orlando shooting happened. 50 gay people were killed in a nightclub by an Islamist terrorist. I wasn't politically active at that point at all. I had a great job. I was working in PR for groups like the Gordon Ramsay group and things like that. Like, I had a normal life, but I wasn't politically active. I'm not of the boomers age, so I didn't get my news from TV and from traditional media. I got it all from YouTube. So I typed in some of the big issues that were going on at the time, like the Orlando shooting and Brexit. The top rated results were Rebel Media, were Milo's account, Milo Yiannopoulos, were far-right accounts. But I didn't know anything about them. I didn't really know even the difference between Tory and Labour or anything like that. But I found what they said super compelling. They were talking about how LGBT is at war with Islam, how women's rights are also going to be eroded because we're importing hordes of people that are going to be reversing democracy and all of this stuff. And I felt like there was a war that was going to be coming. I came out when I was 12 years old, and I felt like it was a serious thing. You had at the same time Channel 4 had the Jihadi Next Door come out, where they had Muslims saying that they were going to throw gay people off buildings in the middle of the street. And I just felt like something really bad was happening. And so I joined that world. I was hired by Rebel Media to be an on-camera correspondent.
And how old were you then?
I was 21, around the age of 21 back then. So I was pretty young. But my whole thing wasn't I didn't subscribe to all the other talking points of the far right people who existed at the time. It was just the LGBT, the idea that gay people are at war with Islam, and I genuinely felt like that was the most important thing, and also that free speech was being eroded. But when I joined that movement, all of my friends cut me off, my family cut me off, I became totally engrossed in an echo chamber. I also, because I had watched a couple of videos after that Orlando shooting that were commenting on it. Milo and Gavin McGuinness were at the scene of that crime when it came out, and they had the biggest video on it. Just because I'd watched those 2 or 3 videos, for the next few months, even since the next day, there was a endless recommendations list to subscribe and to watch other far-right figures. I was also sent emails by YouTube.
Because of this algorithm that YouTube has, that the more outrageous and extreme the content, the more people watch it, and then because people watch it, that's what's recommended, and it's just a vicious circle.
Yeah, and YouTube make a lot of money from it. And I was sort of thinking, it's kind of weird, looking back on it now, I was never looking for that content. A lot of people think, well, you're racist, you're far right, so you go out and you go on the internet and you type in, I don't like black people, and then you get those videos. You type in normal subjects, those videos come up, you watch one of them, and then you're inundated with recommendations by that. So people don't look for this stuff, they're bombarded with it, and that's why it's so toxic and dangerous. I ran some of the biggest, most high-profile YouTube accounts of Lauren Southern, of Tommy Robinson and people like that at the time, when I was right in the middle of it and when I was fully radicalized. And I can say that at least 80% of all of our views, of which we had nearly 500 million on YouTube, came from YouTube recommendations to non-subscribers, people that were not actively searching and looking for that content, and people that weren't interested in that content. It was pushed to those people in the trending tabs and in the home pages, and also emailed to them. So this was something that was bombarding people completely. And obviously I'm partially, responsible as well in this. I was a cog in this machine. I was also creating this content. It's not just the algorithms.
And which was, Peter and I did an article for Byline Times around your work for Tommy Robinson. So for example, give us an example of some of the video content that you were making. I understand that you were doing a lot of the messaging, thinking of where to go, what to film. So just to give viewers an idea, sort of what kinds of things were you looking at?
Well, it was the second wave of Tommy Robinson. The first wave was the EDL. That collapsed. He went to prison and then no one knew who he was. The wave that I was involved in is basically, if you have seen a video by Tommy Robinson in the last, in that period, it will have been something that I made. It was everything. It was the stuff that he did for Rebel. It was the rallies that he organised outside Downing Street, Day for Freedom, things like that. I was at the heart of that entire thing, and actually grew him completely. You know, I gave him.
And he was turning up at people's homes and their workplaces and confronting journalists and all that sort of thing.
It's a bit of a cult. I mean, these people are on a crusade as well. Tommy convinced me that that gay people were under attack, and he's got loads of gay friends, and he's worried about them because of Islamists and because of this sort of stuff. It wasn't until the end of starting to work with him I realised that actually he doesn't really care about gay people. I remember him saying comments that were actually super homophobic to me in the car and things like that, and also to his friends behind my back. So I realised that it was all just an act to kind of pull me in. But it was the same thing with everybody else that I worked with. And I thought, like, a lot of people look at this and they're like, well, how could you join something that's clearly so toxic? And I'm like, it presents as diverse. It presents as Candace Owens, a black woman talking about Black Lives Matter. It presents as gay people. And it's a hugely, you know, it looks soft and it's got production value. So it pulls people in quite easily. And once you're in, you're basically hooked. And that's why I'm basically, like, in the last couple of weeks, I sort of walked away from all this stuff a couple of years ago, right? I decided that I don't want anything to do with this.
So let's just on that front.
Yeah.
What made you decide to step away from it? And
it was a long process of radicalization. You know, it took 6 months to get me into it, but it was the same thing to leave as well. It was moments. It was traveling to Turkey and doing a documentary about human trafficking and people arriving in Europe, who we had demonized for years, and we had said that they are like awful, you know, people who want to invade the West, who are violent and etc. The people that we saw that showed up on those beaches waiting for those boats were the opposite of what I expected. They were genuine refugees. I know this might seem obvious to a lot of people listening to this now, but it was not obvious to people with a different kind of newsfeed. They were people who had horrific stories, people who were genuinely fleeing war, people who had all of their possessions in black bin bags, walking down the side of mountains and hills and taking some of, like, I remember an old lady even took a fall, and it was just horrific, and I felt really guilty about it. And I started stepping away at that point. I said, I'm not going to work with people like Tommy anymore or Lauren anymore. I started to work with Alex Jones a little bit because I just thought, well, he's, you know, a bit of a conspiracy theorist, but he doesn't directly push the far right stuff. But it wasn't enough because Christchurch happened and 50 people were shot in a mosque, and the manifesto of the shooter called it, the shooter's manifesto was called The Great Replacement, which is a video that Lauren had made of the same title, and I read the whole manifesto, and the rhetoric was too similar to stuff that I was involved in.
And how did that make you feel?
It was horrific. I felt extremely guilty. I felt like I had contributed to something that was the same thing that radicalized me in the first place. The same number of people died at the Orlando shooting, and I felt like I had gone full circle on this journey to try and, you know, save the world, to protect gay people, and it's ended up back at the same place, the same kind of violence and the same kind of extremism, which was horrific. I just disappeared from society. Like I disengaged. I said, I don't want to do anything in politics anymore. I don't want to do anything. I went and worked in a pub in the countryside for a year. And it
what was the general reaction? It's something we've talked about before in terms of people leaving these sort of networks. How would you characterize the reaction to you stepping away?
People were
from that
incredibly wary of me. People were saying that I shouldn't be forgiven, and I actually don't blame those people at all. Like I genuinely had done at that time like an incredible amount of damage to society, and I don't think that people that do those sort of things should be able to that participate in that should be able to just freely walk away. I feel like they need to undo that. It's different if you're talking about people like Caleb Kane from the New York Times, who, you know, was a viewer of our content. If someone who is radicalized but they're not actively participating in it, that's a different story. But someone who is participating like me, I feel like that they need to undo to an extent what they helped build.
Yeah.
So I understand that, and I understand that skepticism. That's totally reasonable.
I mean, Peter and I have had obviously queries to Byline Times, and when we announced that you were one of the producers of Byline TV, people have obviously said to us, well, you know, how do you square that with the mission? And, you know, we very much believe that people should take responsibility for what they have done and own the consequences of that. But surely they can use that in order to, you know, to progress something going forward. I mean, people call it sort of, I've seen what's been said about, you know, you're trying to whitewash what was happening, you're trying to rehabilitate yourself and your image, but it's not really true. I mean, again, what do you say to people saying those things? And
yeah.
I mean, has that had some effect in the work we're going to come on to now, which you're doing to try to help other people come out of these networks?
Yeah, I mean, I think I haven't been public. I don't want to make money from my image, and I don't really like going on camera and talking about this stuff because I don't want to benefit from in any way from, you know, talking about these things. But I think that the work speaks for itself. Byline TV, Byline Times specifically is amazing at disinformation and dismantling people that were lied to. One of the biggest videos that I made a few weeks ago was about, you know, people that voted Leave that were lied to. That's kind of you, and I feel like in a way that I'm using the skills and all of the sort of stuff that I used to do for bad, and I'm genuinely using it to contribute to something that is actively dismantling those structures, and it's actually dismantling those people specifically as well.
Yeah.
And that stuff is still huge. Like today, I was filming an interview outside Downing Street, and a couple of Tommy sort of right-wing supporters came up to me and they were like, "Oh, Caolan, like keep up the good work." And I was like, that happened on camera. I think it's coming out next week. But I was like, this is still a huge thing that's still growing, and really needs to be. Like, this is why I'm actively engaged in politics again now, and not just hiding away in the countryside, because I feel like I really have a role to actively use the skills that I have to help build that stuff up, to help take it down, and to also, you know, work with progressives and work with people that actually care about building a better world that doesn't harm or lead to real world violence.
Do you feel that some people who, you know, may describe themselves as progressive or obviously wanting to build a better world and eradicate sort of social and racial injustices, I mean, if their reaction to someone like you is that perhaps they can't look past what you did, and for them that might be a defining characteristic of you now, regardless of what you go on to do. Do you feel, how helpful is that in terms of, if we want to make progress and de-radicalise people and stop them going into these networks and to stop atrocities happening, how helpful do you think having that view is? I mean, how problematic is it, I guess?
It is problematic, but there's a huge number of people that will never accept me and forgive me. But I'm not really interested in that, because I'm not doing any of this stuff to have acceptance and to have friends and to be forgiven and to get into new circles and things like that. I'm doing it because I saw the Capitol storming and I recognized half the faces there, and I felt like I needed to do something, and I felt like maybe some of those people wouldn't have been there if it wasn't for me, or people who were part of that machine. And so I'm literally just doing it because I feel like if I can dismantle it, I started Future Freedom, which is a group that pulls people out of the far right. I did that in response to the Capitol storming with people who were also involved in this industry to walk away.
So that's where people who are trying to leave these networks can contact your organisation and talk to you and others who have been through the same process.
Well, there's no group that exists right now that has been set up post 2016 that directly deals with people that were radicalised by YouTube algorithms, by this sort of civic nationalist light posting stuff. It doesn't exist. They're all sort of from the 90s and they're about traditional neo-Nazis. So I've realised there's an extremely valuable space that needs to be filled, where young people who were in the same position I was when I was 21 and I was typing in Orlando into YouTube feel like they went down a dark journey, but they can walk away and they can have a normal life afterwards. I managed to do that to an extent. Samantha, who co-founded Future Freedom as well, has done that to an extent. And I feel like that is, it's been incredibly effective. We've had hundreds of people inquire and hundreds of people who are involved in the Proud Boys and far-right movements in America who have said, I've wanted to leave for years, and I've never seen anyone else do it, and I just didn't feel like I was empowered to be able to do that.
And the ethos of this group is less about judgment, you were saying, and more about actually just talking to people and listening and relaying your own experiences. Why is that? Why do you think that's a better approach than sort of perhaps another method of doing it, which involves sort of more moralistic sort of narratives?
Like, my interest is just getting people out of the far right. That's it. It's not to convert people to the left or to convert people to communism or anything like that. Like a lot of groups do exist and do that. It's to decrease the size of the far right. So for me, my main objective is to, like, one of the main reasons that people don't leave the far right and leave those groups, and I know that a lot of those people, is because they're terrified that society will reject them, that they'll be judged, and they're terrified of how it's going to be. And that's keeping them in it, and that's keeping the size of the far right in existence, and it's keeping it all growing. So I want to provide a space where we can say, look, you can walk away, you can dismantle a little bit of it, or you can live a normal life afterwards. And people like us have done it, and it's providing resources of other people that have left and stories to empower and sort of get others involved in it to walk away. And that's it. And it's about not judging people. You know, a lot of groups say, well, you have to be left-wing now because you did this, and then you have to be on the other side. We don't care we about where you go afterwards once you're not contributing to damaging society and to growing the far right. We just want you out of it. and we're just a gateway to that. And it's working. It's incredibly successful.
I mean, to me, that seems like a very important structural point, that if your goal is to stop people doing this, then sort of certain moralistic beliefs and moralistic judgments, and it's not necessarily about anyone accepting you. They can accept you or not. But if I guess it's more what you're trying to do to stop people going down that path, regardless of what people think of you, is perhaps what you're trying to get at.
Yeah. And it's a huge industry, and it's still growing, and it's really scary. Just because YouTube have deleted a few people, everyone thinks that these problems are fixed. This morning, as an experiment, I created a brand new YouTube channel, and I watched one Tucker Carlson video. I was immediately recommended Jordan Peterson and a Lauren Southern video. So it's still happening on the same scale it was before. Alex Jones has just in the last half an hour released a whole video about me, saying that I'm, a traitor, because I left a cult, right? I mean, these people are saying being a traitor is worse than being left-wing. That's just received 130,000 views. So the audience is still there and the growth is still there. And I think it's important also with the work we're doing with Future Freedom to highlight the scale of that and to stop people forgetting that it's still there and how important it is.
And let's talk about, so obviously this clip that you provided to Hate Watch about, filmed with Alex Jones. What made you do that? I mean...
Again, the Capitol storming. I felt like it wasn't enough just to leave and actually just to work for an amazingly progressive outlet and providing my skills to dismantle what I used to do before. I actually have to expose a lot of these people, to be completely honest. I've got footage of Alex Jones saying things that are... a lot of Alex Jones supporters would have gone to the Capitol riots and would have gone to these kind of terrible anti-democratic things that have happened. If they would have seen the clip that I've just posted last week, which is of Alex saying that he doesn't actually care about, Trump, and he's basically like a grifter, right? They might not have gone, and they might not see those people as a messiah that they do. So I think it's extremely valuable and extremely important that those people see that stuff directly. Because if the left-wing media, which is how they see the media, like this big scary left-wing thing, says that Alex Jones is a grifter, they're going to say, well, they're just saying that because they're left-wing. If I can actually provide complete evidence and say, well, this is him saying it himself, I think it will be extremely effective and more than any kind of story that's been done about him. So I feel like it's valuable, and I'm just going to continue to do that.
Yeah. And in terms of Future Freedom, I mean, how big do you want it to grow, and do you think it could really start to change that narrative that we've been talking about, that it's not about acceptance or judgment or moral issues, it's just how do we stop people doing this should be perhaps the biggest priority of all. I mean, you hope that what you're doing can contribute to changing that. What might that involve beyond Future Freedom? I mean...
It's a hard question because I didn't start it thinking that it would blow up like it did. I thought that a few people would see it and that it could provide resources to people to just question what they're doing and maybe think, you know what, maybe now's the time to leave. But it has been 1,000 times bigger than what I thought it would be, just in terms of the number of people that are contacting us and the number of people that feel like that are resonating with it and say that finally for the first time I've read something that I feel like you get it. And I want it to completely encompass that space where if people, I think over the next few years as well, there's going to be a lot of people who were part of the system that I was involved in and who were viewers of this kind of content, who feel like it's time to leave and who feel like it's all gotten a bit too far, or maybe who saw real world events like I did a few years ago and walked away. And I feel like I want to become the number one space where they can go to get away from that, because it's not judgmental, it's not harmful, it's not trying to profit off those people, it's not trying to turn them into like celebrities or whatever. It's just to get people out. That's our only goal. So I think it'll be pretty big. It's just been overwhelming. It's been amazing.
And just finally, do you regret it, Caolan, or has it just been part of the journey that's got you to this point where you're now helping other people with their radicalization?
It hasn't been. It's hard. I think that stuff all the time. I feel incredibly guilty about it. Of course, I regret doing it. If I can take tens and hundreds of thousands of people out of the far right in a couple of years, and if my work can really dismantle and undo what I helped build to a point where it's in a worse state than when I found it, then I won't regret it. But I haven't managed to do that yet because it has grown out of control, and I feel like I've still created a monster. So still to this point, fully wish I never met Tommy, wish I never typed Orlando into YouTube and did that whole process. Yeah.
Well, thank you for coming and talking to us about it. And no doubt, you know, in time we'll be talking more about your work dismantling some of these far-right networks and the people in them. But thank you, Caolan.